Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait for people to trickle in. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Switzer, and I work at the Center for Community-Based Research. And in a moment, I will ask my colleagues and co-facilitators to introduce themselves. But first, we'll get started and we'll give you a bit of an overview of today. So this webinar is part two, in a 4-part series designed to build community-based evaluation capacity to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a partnered project between the Center for Community-Based Research and Conrad Grebel University College, which are both located on the traditional territories of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, otherwise known as Waterloo, Ontario. Both the Center for Community-Based Research and Conrad Grebel University College are located on the University of Waterloo campus, which is situated on the Haldimand Tract. The land promises of 6 nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Today, we will be talking about the first phase in community-based evaluation, laying the foundation, which really begs the question, where do we begin with these conversations? Given this, we acknowledge our foundations are on the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people, as I mentioned before, who continue to have an unresolved interest in the lands within 6 miles of the Grand River. This webinar really locates our discussion on the SDGs around 3 particular SDGs, although this conversation is open to all. And we've got the 3 SDGs on our PowerPoint slide here: quality education, peace and justice, and gender equity. One of the things we've been talking a lot about in our previous webinar and amongst our team is that we really cannot talk about achieving the targets outlined in any of the SDGs, including SDG 16, 5, or 4, without centering the perspectives of Indigenous peoples on this land and across Turtle Island. You know, what does peace and justice work look like? What does gender equity work look like? What does quality education work look like? What does a broad understanding of these SDGs include? We might also ask, sustainable for whom? For example, Indigenous Climate Action is just one of the many incredible grassroots organizations in Canada or across Turtle Island fighting for climate justice and peace work, one might argue, by utilizing and uplifting Indigenous knowledge systems. ICA's Healing Justice Program seeks to understand and build new ways of being that bring about restorative decolonial practices and tools that strengthen the health of our bodies and our whole selves. And they really see this as crucial as a foundation for Indigenous peoples to thrive in just climate futures. For individuals who are calling in, who might not be able to see these slides, there's an image on the screen of a gathering with a large banner at the top that reads, "Stop the destruction, start the healing." As we think about localizing the SDGs in the Canadian context, again, we might consider our foundation. Where do we begin? How do we acknowledge and honor the work that is already happening in communities across the country that link into the SDGs? And we encourage you, given the national and possibly international reach of this webinar today, to introduce yourselves in chat. Let us know about the work and the contributions that are happening on the ground in your own communities. And please let us know where you're calling in from or where your feet might be planted. Some housekeeping notes just to start. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on our website. In theory, it should only show the active speaker. However, please feel free to turn your camera off or change your name if you don't want any of this information captured. The chat won't be recorded or shared. However, we will be sharing resources out afterwards. We ask you to please keep your microphone off because there's a number of folks on the call. And for tech questions, feel free to reach out to Madeline. And Madeline, I'm going to ask you to change your name on the participants list to For Tech, just so that people can find you easily. And finally, closed captioning is enabled, so please toggle it on or off as you need to using the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen. All right, and given that, it is time for introductions. I introduced myself briefly at the beginning, but my name is Sarah Switzer, and I'm a senior researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research. I'm personally zooming in from Takaranto, otherwise known as Toronto, as covered by Treaty 13. And I'm going to invite all of my colleagues to say a few words, to introduce themselves, and to all of you to type into chat. Tell us where you're calling in from, where your feet are planted, and a little bit about yourself. So it looks like, Paul, you're below me on my screen. Do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Heiderbrecht. I am excited to be a part of this project. I work at Conrad Grebel University College, and I'm calling in from the campus of the University of Waterloo and the Haldeman Tract.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rich Jansen, Executive Director at the Center for Community-Based Research. I'm also on the University of Waterloo campus, and good to see everyone here today. Jean?
Yeah, thank you, Rich. My name is Jean Dodier Bassavose. I work for the Center for Community-Based Research as a researcher, working particularly on this project. Madeleine?
Hey everyone, I'm Madeline. I'm a student intern at CCBR and a graduate student at Conrad Grebel University College.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you. I see the chat is a flurry. It's always a little bit hard to read the chat while you're also moderating or facilitating. But just to acknowledge all of you and your voices in this room. It looks like folks are calling in from all sorts of, from different locations across the country and doing lots of different work in different sectors. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jean, who's going to tell us a little bit about today.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Here are our aims for today. We are going to be focusing on what is community-based evaluation. Just for this, we will do a kind of recapitulation of what we discussed last during our last webinar. And we talk about how to set your evaluation up for success by laying a strong foundation, and why integrating the SDGs into your theory of change that may encourage bottom-up approach to Canada's 2030 agenda. Let us move on, Sarah. As a reminder, today's webinar is on laying the foundation. We will be diving into how to plan and implement your evaluation next. Each webinar, as now for this webinar series, each webinar is or will be sharing training on how to conduct a community-based evaluation with a particular focus on SDGs 4, 5, and 16. However, all SDGs are welcome. Please register for the other webinars. Madeleine will put a link with sign-up links into the chat for you to register. Next slide, please. As a recapitulation, let's just remind ourselves about why this project. This project is a partnered project by Conrad Grebel University College and the Center for Community-Based Research, and it is funded by the Employment and Social Development Canada. This project is an opportunity to engage stakeholders in reflective practice when working to eliminate violence and promote peaceful and equitable societies. It is an opportunity to build the community-based evaluation capacity of organizations involved in advancing the SDGs with a focus on peace, gender equality, and education. This project is a part of a bigger agenda helping Canada achieve its agenda for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This project, move on please. This project has particularly focused on SDGs, just 3 SDGs, SDGs 5, 16, and 4. For further information, Madeleine will put a link to this SDGs target into chat, just for your information. What if I call my colleague just to continue with recapitulation on some information, overview information on community-based evaluation. Rich.
Thank you, Jean. And yes, last webinar we talked, the focus of it was what is community-based evaluation. And so I'll just give a very brief overview for those of you who were there. It's just a recap for those of you who weren't there. You have a sense of what we talked last time. And so what is community-based? What does that qualifier in front of evaluation actually mean? And we can think of it in terms of 3 hallmarks, linking to rich global research traditions. It's stakeholder-driven, it's participatory, it's action-oriented. The evaluation is relevant, practical for stakeholders, those whose lives are in some way affected by the issue under evaluation. It's driven by its theory of change. It's evaluation for self-determination, in other words. It's participatory. It involves stakeholders meaningfully throughout the evaluation, from conceptualization to the use, to the implementation of the action, the recommendations, which leads us to the action orientation, that it is about learning, but it's also about improvements, making improvements to the interventions that we are evaluating. Another way of thinking about community-based evaluation is the goals. What does it seek to do? What's the function of our evaluation? And like other evaluation, and in fact all research, it's about learning. It's a form of inquiry. We ask questions, get answers, and we've learned something, and we need to do that in a rigorous way that adheres to standards of quality. But community-based evaluation is more than just learning. It's also about sharing what we're learning. We're communicators, able to communicate in ways that are effective for multiple audiences, those who are to use the results in some way. And then thirdly, it's also about relationships. It is an intervention. The act of evaluation is part of the intervention, and it's about facilitating people towards the goals that they identify. And then finally, last time we talked about the 4 phases and 11 non-linear steps. That is like our GPS for this webinar series, starting with laying the foundation, which is the focus for today, and 4 steps that we'll cover today. Also about planning for the evaluation in phase 2. And in phase 3, implementing those plans by gathering the data and analyzing and summarizing that data. And finally, phase 4 is the phase which is about acting on the findings. And so if we think about evaluation, we do the evaluation in phase 1, 2, and 3, and we use the results in phase 4. The evaluation is not done until there's that use element towards that. And so part of our learning about community-based evaluation, how do we make sure that we're acting on the findings throughout the process, but particularly in phase 4. And so today we are focusing on phase 1, which we'll talk a lot about stakeholder engagement and about the relational aspect of the importance of laying a good foundation, but also recognize that this stakeholder engagement happens throughout. So we're laying the foundation for research and for evaluation, but we're also laying the foundation for the relationships that we want to nurture and build and facilitate throughout the evaluation. So that's in a nutshell what we unpacked last time. So over to you, Jean, for focusing us on today.
Thank you, Rich, for today's webinar. We are going to be focusing on the first phase, which is laying the foundation. And this phase, laying the foundation, involves identifying stakeholders, building trusting relationships, identifying assumptions and clarifying roles and responsibilities, highlighting your theory of change and identifying the evaluation purpose. Rich, I invite you just to continue to tell us much more about this first phase of community-based evaluation.
All right, I think this might actually be me. Thanks, Sean, for giving us a bit of a map of where we're going to be going today. So today's webinar really picks up on our webinar last week to start talking about what are the steps we need to take to lay a strong foundation, as Jean alluded to, for doing this work. And where we might start, Rich alluded to, there's a series of relational and technical aspects in community-based evaluation, but we often start with this question of like, who's in the room, who takes part in our evaluation processes. And at its core, stakeholders are individuals or groups who have a stake in the issues under study and are important to the success of any evaluation. Each project, issue, program, or SDG will have different sets of stakeholders. And when we're thinking about stakeholders, at the beginning of any project, it can be helpful to consider who is a stakeholder in your project. Stakeholder mapping can be one way to identify key stakeholders that could be considered in your kind of evaluation project, in terms of making sure that we've got different sets of expertise represented on a project. Starting really with people with lived experience, communities experiencing the issue underhand. In an organization, this might be program participants, but recognizing that there's lots of different organizational types or startups or whatnot in the room. We've also got influencers, so folks who impact the lives of those who live with the issue. So again, in an organizational context, this might include program providers, and then sustainers, people who have the power and resources to make lasting changes to improve people's lives at a kind of policy level. Now, one thing to highlight with this map, you will notice that there are dots around the circles. They're not bounded, right? That people can wear multiple hats. Boundaries can be a bit porous, and that folks may hold multiple roles amongst these different circles. And at the end of the day, really here, that the key thing is that participation of folks across all three categories is essential for an evaluation success. And of course, we'll be discussing this in future webinars. There's still lots of dynamics at play, whether it's around power, negotiation, ethics, etc. But really, we're leveraging the voices and experiences, the collective wisdom of all involved in community-based evaluation. Now, there are various ways to involve stakeholders in your project. In today's webinar, we'll be talking a little bit about how to involve stakeholders at the team level or at the steering group level. But folks may also be involved as participants in consultation, providing feedback on preliminary analysis, implementing recommendations, etc. And we will unpack that further as we talk about gathering, data gathering and analysis, as well as acting on findings in subsequent webinars. Now, you'll notice at the top, there are two kind of working cogs. There's the steering committee, which can also be known as the advisory committee or community advisory board, and the evaluation team. In community-based evaluation, we often like to think about the steering committee or the advisory committee as the guiders. They're the folks that help us ensure the project is on the right track, and are made up of different folks in different roles and different sets of expertise, including lived experience. And then the evaluation team is the doers, right? And they can also have folks in different roles, of course. But in essence, the steering committee will help provide guidance and oversight over the project, and then the evaluation team conducts the evaluation, keeping diversity of roles and whatnot in mind for both. So for a steering committee, before the evaluation really does anything, they vet their ideas through the group that might meet regularly to provide guidance on a project. A steering committee in community-based evaluation is made up of the various stakeholders of a program, as I mentioned, keeping diversity of role and identity in mind. It guides the evaluation through each step of the process. They meet regularly throughout the evaluation, often at kind of clear points to keep things moving. And the steering committee can make it more likely that the evaluation will be used because you've got folks that have a stake in the program or in the organization driving a lot of the decisions. And lastly, steering committees can be structured in all sorts of different ways to meet the needs of various stakeholders. So we've gone through quite a bit in a short amount of time. So we wanted to pause for a moment and to ask all of you to reflect silently. You can take out a pen, a pencil, but give a few moments to think about in your particular project, initiative, startup, organization, proposed evaluation plan, whatever it might be, who has a stake in your program or initiative? Who has a stake in your program or initiative? And which of these stakeholders might be involved in your evaluation team or on your steering committee? I'll give you a few moments just to think about that. And we'd love to hear from some of you in the room. We won't, there's too many folks to be able to unmute, but I invite you to type into chat. Who has a stake in your program or initiative? You don't have to necessarily add names, certainly, but the types, you can think about types of roles here. Types of roles. Who might be involved? Folks can keep marinating on that question as we move forward. Yeah. Now the chat's a flurry. You have to read them out here. Yeah, so there's a comment about the capacity to engage. Yeah, so that's a good consideration, right? In terms of what folks are juggling. And we can think from, we'll be talking more about evaluation design next time, but how do we create evaluation processes to ensure that folks are able to meaningfully participate. So that's a really good consideration, whether sometimes it's compensation, sometimes it's ensuring training and whatnot to ensure that capacity is thought through. See a note about community members, absolutely. That is absolutely vital when it comes to community-based evaluation. Donors, workplaces, program participants, yeah, coordinators. If you're seeking to kind of influence change at the funding level, it can be really helpful to have funders or folks that are in decision-making positions on the steering committee, because it increases the uptake that the findings may be used, while also ensuring we've got folks with lived experience at the forefront. Yeah, so other comments about having, different variation of different stakeholders. I see a note in the chat about students. Yeah, thinking about the contributions students can make, sure. Yeah, thinking about who is missing from these conversations, who isn't at the table, and how do we structure processes accordingly to make sure that their voices are at the center. Yeah. And there's a great question here. What's in it for the participants? What would motivate them to share their time? Yeah. And this is really, really, really essential. We're gonna get to this in a moment around kind of evaluation purpose and whatnot. But ideally, steering committees get started at the very, very beginning. So the very first questions that we're asking folks around, what is this evaluation for? Why are we doing it? Those conversations are all going to be shaped by the folks at the table. All right, thanks all. I'm going to give a few more seconds just to see if there's any other thoughts in chat. Yeah, absolutely. Such great thoughts here around thinking about different languages, thinking about larger issues of power. absolutely central and key. And as today's kind of, again, the starting conversation, we're going to be talking more about evaluation planning at the next webinar. And these are all the pieces that, really take place at the forefront of a project in order to ensure we have a solid foundation. And we'll be talking about this more again next time as well. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Jean, who's going to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. When conducting an evaluation, we always have assumptions and perception. It is important that there is a shared understanding at the outset of an evaluation and about the purpose as well as the principles of community-based evaluation. It is a good idea to build a conversation about expectations and shared assumptions at the beginning of the process. Here it is an opportunity to consider our own perceptions and assumptions of what evaluation is or what the evaluation entails. This includes common assumptions and understanding of what evaluation is or entails, different goals or expectations of the evaluation, and mismatched expectations regarding time, financial restraint, and commitment. There may be various assumptions from different people, from different stakeholders, from funders, different assumptions from managers, participants, and so on. About what evaluation entails, there are different perceptions and different expectations of the evaluation. Having upfront and transparent discussions about expectations and assumptions upfront will help your team navigate the project down the road. I would like to invite now my colleague Rich to talk about theory of change.
Thanks, Jean. So Sarah mentioned step one as identifying and organizing stakeholders, and Jean about talking about the assumptions of evaluation, what is good evaluation, and making sure that there's a shared assumptions about that. Now we'll shift to highlighting your theory of change. And if you remember in the hallmarks of community-based evaluation, that first hallmark of stakeholder driven talked about having the local theory of change drive the evaluation process. So it's worthwhile talking a little bit about what do we mean by theory of change. And simply a theory of change is a clear statement of what the program is supposed to do. Every program, every intervention has a theory of change. I think often it's not explicit, it's often maybe assumed or in the background, or people may have different assumptions about what the theory of change is, but this step brings it to the foreground to make sure that there is a clear and agreed upon theory of change by the steering committee that is guiding the evaluation. So what is a theory of change? Well, in my mind, it's really two key words: activities and outcomes. The activities of what the program or the intervention does, and the outcomes, which are the expected changes that are result from those activities. You can think about activities in different levels, individual level, could be organizational, societal, community level. So there can be different levels of activities and different levels of outcomes. And often in program evaluation, a logic model is a tool that's used to visualize the theory of change. There's different ways to talk about theory of change. You can write out your theory of change, but often in a picture format, a visual format, a logic model is used. And you can see in the chat many examples of logic models. We'll show you a few in a moment. So let's unpack logic models a little bit more. And on the next slide, you can see, again, those two keywords, activities and outcomes. Activities, what you do, the strategies, and then the different levels of outcomes we have from in this case, it's organized by time, immediate, intermediate, or long-term. And sometimes people call that ultimate outcomes. And then there's also two other words on this page, the inputs and the outputs. So the inputs are the resources that fuel the intervention, the activities. That could be staff, volunteers, funding, any resource that gives life to the program. And the outputs are simply the tangible things that result because of your activities. So you can count outputs, how many people attended, how many workshops you had, how many, this, that, or the other thing, how many resources, deliverables did you produce? It's important to note here the difference between outputs and outcomes. Outputs are things that you produce, whereas outcomes are the things that change as a result of your activities. And so in the examples that we see in a moment, you'll see that outcomes usually start with a change word, like more or less, increased, augmented, or some sort of change word that is used. The next slide is an example of a template of a logic model. And it's organized, there you can see again the activities and the outcomes. And around activities, you can see the inputs. If you can animate to get the arrows in there, the inputs leading into the activities and which result in some outputs. But then on the other side, the red side, is where you get to the outcomes, the changes that result. And here again, it's organized short-term, intermediate, and long-term. There's different ways that you can organize it. This is one common way to do that over time. There's a cascading kind of chain of change that occurs. This is also more of a linear type of logic model where there's a cause, which is the activities, and then the effect, which is the change. If you are evaluating a program, particularly a smaller program, this is more typical of having, you're doing something and then there's change. Some of you may be doing systems change work though, which is a little bit more complex, which maybe won't look quite as linear as this. And so you'll be thinking not so much about cause and effects, about attribution of what you do to the change, but you may be thinking about what's your contribution to the system change, that you are one part of many other changes that are happening in the community that you're working. This particular template also has some other bells and whistles. You can see assumptions in the bottom. Sometimes logic models have assumptions or maybe values that guide the activities. And then it also encourages people to write out their external factors. What's the context within which you are working? Maybe some challenges or some opportunities. So there's different ways that you can add to the core of activities and outcomes within your logic model. There's lots of ways of presenting logic models. I'm going to show you two just by way of illustration. And this one is from here in Waterloo Region, Reception House, a local organization that supports refugee newcomers, and they had a project called the Working Together Project. And really, this was an example. We'll talk a little bit later about different purposes of evaluation. And one type of evaluation you can think of as developmental evaluation. So this is an example of innovation because they started at the top there. You can see that blue box with language training. This is a top-bottom kind of a logic model where activities are at the top and outcomes are on the bottom. And they started with saying, hey, we should have language training in the workplace for refugee newcomers. Rather than have people to decide whether to have ESL or to have a job, why not bring them together, right? And not a lot of models around the world about this, so they were trying to figure that out. They started with that language training box, and then they realized that they needed to add another box during employment, which was about vocational support. The organization, the company needed support as well as the newcomer needed support about how to work within a new Canadian environment. And then they realized that there were other activities that also were needed before employment. And so those two red boxes on the left, you can see the pre-employment support and the initial workplace support. And at the bottom, you can see the different levels of outcomes, starting with the intermediate levels of outcomes that were more the individual level capacities that were increased. And then as we flow down the logic model, more to changes in well-being or system functioning. So individual level, but also more of a community level of change. But the part I wanted to highlight the most of this particular logic model is in the top left. You see that green circle there, version 17, April 2020. Again, this is an example of a developmental evaluation where the logic model was constantly evolving. Evaluation was used to shape this logic model. Based on the reflection and ongoing learning, this was over 3 years, this particular logic model changed 17 times. And so we can think about logic models not as static, but as a constant negotiation among stakeholders. What are we trying to do to what end? And let's use evaluation to hone our thinking about what we should be doing better and how we can be thinking about what kind of change we're actually aiming for. So this is maybe a more traditional look of a logic model with boxes and arrows. But there's lots of other ways of depicting. Here's one that from our partners in Alberta, the Evaluation Capacity Network, using a metaphor approach to the logic model, thinking about an apple tree, with the activities being the roots, right? That result in something. The activities, all those activities, and you can see the happy sun there as being the inputs, the resources that fuel the growth that's to happen. And the short-term outcomes being the buds. The first things that happen to get fruit are the buds. And so those are the short-term outcomes. By the way, this was a program dealing with young children, so hence the the happy sun and other kind of child-friendly images here. And then the midterm outcomes are the apples, the fruit that is bearing, the change that is happening. And then we all know that really the reason we have apple trees is to eat apple pie. And so that is the long-term outcomes that you have there. And this particular logic model, in addition to activities, outcomes, and inputs, includes the challenges, that context, right? That's the acid rain. So being aware of some of the contextual factors as we try to grow our apples and apple pie. So there's lots of ways. Metaphors are becoming much more popular. Circles are becoming much more popular, particularly for more systems change, for complex interventions where there isn't the cause and effect. The idea is that your theory of change is a collective theory of change, that people say, yes, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And the logic model and the theory of change helps to guide the evaluation. But it's not an exercise of just one person in their office designing a logic model. It's a facilitation of coming to the yes of this is what we are intending to do and to what end. And so the last slide before we shift to step 4 is just some final tips about thinking about logic models, thinking of them as living documents, right? That version 17 kind of idea, that hold them loosely. They are what's guiding your particular evaluation, but you can also constantly reflect and use evaluation as interrogating or reflecting on your theory of change. Thinking of evaluation as learning about how to deepen your theory of change. And spend time thinking about connections between the different elements. Asking yourself, how do these different components, the activities, really link together? Do they really lead to these kind of outcomes? Are there other ways of articulating outcomes? Be critical of your theory of change, and evaluation really is that tool to help you to be critical about your theory of change. And finally, consider about how your theory of change may intersect with the SDGs. It's your theory of change that drives the evaluation, but it can draw on the SDGs, the targets of the SDGs. In order to link your theory of change to broader theory that's out there. Not losing the centrality of your local theory, but drawing on and enriching your local theory of change by considering the SDG targets and how they might fit particularly into the immediate and the long-term outcomes.
Thanks so much, Rich. I see there's a number of questions in chat, and we do have some time for questions at the very end of the webinar, but the questions I see in chat are specifically related to theory of change. So maybe we can address them quickly now, if that makes sense, Rich. There's a question in the chat. Is the theory of change similar to strategic planning? Do you want to speak to that, Rich?
Yes, there's a relationship between theory of change and strategic planning, but strategic planning is more intentionality of highlighting a few areas that you want to focus on. It could be considered as like looking at your full theory of change and how now do you want to live it out? What are the thrusts of living out your theory of change in a strategic plan? Could say more about that, but maybe that's enough for now.
Right. Thanks so much, Rich. And we'll have a chance to take questions as well at the end. Okay. So Rich shared a little bit about theories of change. This is kind of a dipping in. We can have much longer conversations about it for sure. Then the next step in kind of the laying the foundation refers to developing an evaluation purpose statement. And earlier in the chat, there was comments and kind of questions around like the evaluation mandate, you know, essentially what guides your evaluation. An evaluation purpose statement is something that's crafted at the beginning of an evaluation, again, with all the stakeholders in mind. This is a collaborative, collective exercise to really hone in on the purpose of the evaluation, to create clarity around what the evaluation is for and what the intended outcomes of the evaluation will be. Now, this might seem like a very simple step, but it can take some time, and it's really, really critical to laying a strong foundation. All right. As you see on the slide, an evaluation purpose statement is collaboratively developed to clarify what will be done, as I alluded to. It reflects the interests of all stakeholder groups. So again, it's collaborative, it's collective. You'll hear us say that word collaborative quite a few times in this webinar series, and it's clearly worded. And figuring out the wording is a process that can really be rewarding in the long run in terms of helping refine some of that clarity. Now, there's different purposes of evaluation. We can have developmental evaluation, which is often used for program improvement of an ongoing program, and the development of a program to look at some of the contexts that the program or the organization is situated in, and to really kind of dive into how a program or an organization might be responsive to ensure the needs of their stakeholders are met. We've got formative evaluation, which is used for the improvement of an ongoing program, right? So developmental evaluation is often used when a program is just starting out sometimes, or sometimes it can be a program that's been running for a while but needs a kind of a refresh. Formative is kind of your ongoing evaluation. So this is based on the outcomes of a formative evaluation, and the program can then be modified to improve on information gained during that evaluation itself. And finally, there is summative organization. This often serves as a bit of an accountability function. It is the evaluation that folks are probably most common with. Many, you know, if you ask someone on the street, what is evaluation? This is the thing that happens at the end of a program or the end of a cycle to, describe the overall success of a program and to figure out should it be continued. But this is only one of all three different types of evaluation. All right. And sometimes evaluations can have multiple purposes, right? They can transition between the few and can work in conjunction with one another. Now, one of the things you'll notice at the bottom is there's some verbs here. These are just sample verbs. They're example verbs, but attending to the verb can be one helpful strategy or tool to figuring out what type of evaluation you're working towards. Developmental evaluations tend to use verbs like explore, create, reframe. Again, they're developmental. Formative evaluations tend to use verbs like to review, to explain, to understand, to reflect on program participants' experiences, for example. And summative often use verbs like determine, assess, and ascertain. Now, these are just guidelines, but they can be helpful in thinking through evaluation purpose statements. So here's an example of the developmental purpose statement, and I'll read it out loud. The purpose of this evaluation is to create an ongoing evidence-based forum to inform and stimulate the working together project partners in order to develop innovative approaches to improving the vocational and language skills of refugees in the workplace. There was a question in chat earlier that asking us about one of the theories of change examples that Rich shared, and it was from the Working Together project. So this is from the same project. And you'll notice at the top of the screen, there's a bit of a helpful formula for thinking of a purpose statement that again can be a start, right? We don't have to feel bounded by this, but it can kind of help get us unstuck sometimes when we're thinking about evaluation purpose statements. And so it starts with the purpose of this evaluation is to. You introduce a verb to really think about what type of evaluation it is. You then expand on the scope, target, audience, and focus of the evaluation, which really gets at kind of both process and outcomes pieces. And then there's the in order to, there's the so what, right? What is the purpose of the evaluation? And this is a 4-part webinar series. So the webinars do build on each other. And last webinar series, one of the things we talked about was how do we do meaningful evaluation that really ensures that findings are used and mobilized and taken up by communities, right? So what's the purpose of this evaluation? What are you trying to get at in doing it with your community partners? So here are some additional examples of purpose statements. We don't have time to read through them in details, but they will be included in the slide deck itself. And we've highlighted some of the verbs here. You'll see here to assess, to understand, to determine, to collaboratively explore, to collaboratively determine. And it may be a simple act, but you can think about as you're formulating your purpose statements, what does it mean to put collaboratively before the verb itself? How does it change that? And how does that then push you and your team to change some of your processes, right? Or systems to ensure that it is collaborative, to ensure those meaningful participation of all stakeholders is really driving the evaluation, going back to the hallmarks and the goals of community-based participatory evaluation that Rich alluded to earlier. We can also consider how evaluation purpose statements can be a mix of a few different types of evaluation. So here's another moment to kind of pause because we've given you a lot of information. We recognize that. So we'll just hold the space for a moment. And I want to encourage all of you to think about what type of evaluation you will be conducting in your next evaluation. Will it be a developmental evaluation? Used for the development of a program, for a new program to understand the context, to understand the needs, kind of a needs assessment? Will it be a formative evaluation that'll be your program is already ongoing, you know, and you're checking in on how things are going. What are people's experiences? How can we use these findings to improve the program, to reflect, to meaningfully reflect? Or is it summative? Are you ending a program and you're looking to look back and say, okay, well, what worked and what didn't work, and how do we communicate these findings forward? And it can be a mix, right? We've got a few of you doing developmental. Yeah, lots of developmental in the room. Okay. Some summative, a lot of formative developmental, yeah.
Sarah, if I could add, just another way of thinking of the difference between these 3, developmental, formative, and summative, is in regards to your theory of change. How loosely or tightly are you holding your theory of change? In a summative evaluation, your theory of change is fairly set. You're still learning and can change it, but you have a pretty good sense of what you are doing and what you want to see. And so you're kind of looking backwards, right? And seeing if that theory of change is actually being lived out. On the other end of the continuum, and think of this as a continuum, is developmental evaluation, where you're basically building the theory of change as you're doing your intervention. And then formative is somewhere in between. So think of this as a sliding scale of how loosely or tightly you're holding your theory of change.
Thanks so much, Rich. That was a great additional point. And there's a question, oops, I'll go back there. There's a question in chat that we can speak to quickly, clarifying the difference between developmental and formative evaluation. Developmental evaluation is often done when a project or a program or is really just kind of getting off the ground, like it's a brand new program. So you're really kind of assessing the landscape, so to speak. Formative is often used when it's ongoing, when a project or program has been running and it's a checking in on how things are going.
And I'll just add to that, and developmental classically is also understood in terms of innovation, right? Where there is a complexity in the space that you're trying to build your intervention. There's not agreement about what should happen and what kind of change you're actually going for. And so it's that notion of when you're not drawing on a lot of other people's theories of change, there's not a lot of models out there, and you're trying to create the model, the theory of change, as you're doing the intervention. That's, in classic terms, is developmental.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And thank you for folks who are contributing into chat and asking questions. There was a comment I saw about learn being a word that you can use for formative, and absolutely these verbs are just suggestions and examples. We could think though, learning happens like when we're thinking about co-learning and community-based evaluation, all evaluation should involve learning in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. All right, thank you, everyone. All right, so I'm going to pass this off to my colleague Jean, who's just going to give us a bit of a summary of what we talked about so far before we open it up for questions again.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Just to say that in this webinar too, we have presented about identifying stakeholders, building trusting relationships, identifying assumptions and clarifying roles and responsibilities, highlighting theory of change, and identifying the evaluation purpose. Just to also to remind you that this is the first, next slide, this is the first phase of the fourth phase of community-based evaluation. Just to show you that we have already done the first phase. We remain with the 3 phases to do, and I encourage you to come to next webinars to continue learning about this, the other phases. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you to all of you for coming out. Again, we will be continuing this dialogue in our next webinar. We'll be focusing on evaluation planning and information gathering and analysis. We'll be talking about determining the evaluation questions, developing methods for collecting information, analysis. We'll be talking about ethics. That'll be a big component of the webinar, as well as kind of implementing your projects. Okay. Oops, I went forward one. There we go. So we don't have too much time left, but in case there's any outstanding questions, we invite you to enter them into chat. And for the questions that we can't attend to, we encourage you to come back to subsequent webinars, and we'll also try to reach out via other means. But yeah, any questions folks may have, you can type them into chat.
Sarah, I see one question about indicators. We didn't talk about indicators, so maybe next webinar we'll be talking a little bit about that when we get to talking about methods. But if you think about all the outcomes that are in your logic model, every single one of those outcomes will have multiple indicators. How do you know that change actually happened? What are the observables that let us know whether that change has happened or not. That's what an indicator is an observable. So you can go to all of your outcomes and think about what would indicate whether that change would happen. And that leads then to methods, like how are we going to go about gathering that information that gives us evidence for those indicators. So that's in part what we'll be talking about next time. But other point that I would like to make here around the indicators, and thank you for this question, is that we can look to the SDGs for those indicators. And think about the SDGs and what the work of the UN as giving us a menu of options for the indicators related to the outcomes that we've identified. In some of our previous work at CCBR, for example, in the refugee newcomer field, we've developed an outcome inventory so that when groups want to think about their outcomes, they don't have to start from scratch. They can look at this inventory of options, right, that other people have talked about, but they're still building their own theory of change. That's what's driving their evaluation, even if they're drawing on the outcomes or the corresponding indicators of outside groups like the UN's SDGs.
Thanks for that, Rich. Also, there's a few of you who reached out to me by direct message, sharing different examples and tools and resources. I just put a message in chat. Feel free to reach out to us by email. Sometimes it's difficult to keep on top of the chat, but please keep sharing resources our way. And if I didn't respond or any of us didn't respond, we probably just missed it. So definitely reach out at the end. All right. So I think we unfortunately are at time. But as a reminder, please come out to our next webinar. We'd love to continue the conversation with you as we'll be talking about evaluation planning and information gathering and analysis. And we'll hope to continue the conversation. To learn more, check out our website online. Madeline's going to type the website into chat. This website also has our slide decks. We'll be putting this webinar recording live on the website as well. There's a workbook there that you can consult, and there's a resource section. We are always looking for new resources. This is very much a new collaborative space for us. So send us your resources so that we can put them online and feature some of them to kind of help others along the way on their journey towards localizing the SDGs. Webinar 1 will also be there for those of you who missed webinar 1. I'll have Madeline again pop the link to register, so please come on out. Check out our website as I just referenced. And finally, reach out. As I mentioned before, this is a partnered project between the Center for Community-Based Research and the Kindred Credit Union Center for Peace Advancement at Conrad Grebel University College. Contact us, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you again. We really look forward to continuing this conversation. We're so appreciative of everything everyone shared in chat, even if we couldn't keep up. This is what makes this work, I think, really unique and special is having this space to dialogue and connect and talk and share. And so thank you all for everyone that contributed today via chat. And we look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thanks so much, everyone.